Welcome to the training principle of increasing specificity, also known as the principle of specificity. I wanted to start out with a quote, but I let you read it because it's a very long one and I probably make a mistake somewhere along the way. Anyway, it's from Louis Sullivan, the father of the modern skyscraper. What does this quote have to do with training? One thing that is very important, form ever follows function. And that concept of form follows function is a very important concept for training as well. So, what will you learn in this lecture of increasing specificity? The basic premise of this principle, the biological basis for that principle, and, as always, the practical application. So, what's the basic premise of this principle of increasing specificity? The adaptation is specific to a stimulus, and that stimulus can either be in training or competition, not to be misunderstood. Competition is a very strong stimulus as well. We said form follows function, which basically means form is the adaptation and function is the stimulus. So whatever stimulus you set, the adaptation will follow. What's the biological basis for that principle? There is this so-called SAID, not to be confused with seasonal affective disorder. It's called specific adaptations to imposed demands. It was supposed to be a joke, actually. So, form follows function means that within an organism, structures are formed directly in correlation to what they are meant to do. What does that mean? Again, form follows function. The adaptation will be specific to the stimulus you set. What is the practical application? Before we get started with the practical application, I want to direct your attention to that it's called the principle of increasing specificity and not the principle of specificity. Why is that important? Again, I think very often these training principles are misunderstood, like the principle of individuality is one of them. Everything needs to be individual. Not too sure. You need to also train progressive. You need to set an optimal stimulus. So therefore, individuality has its place, but it's not the basis of training. The same is true with specificity. Obviously, everyone likes the idea specific, but it is an increase in specificity. You probably have seen something like that where it shows that what we just said, an increase in specificity. So we have on the y-axis arbitrary units from a distribution from 0 to 100 in percent, and on the x-axis we have the time, and we can see that specificity throughout time is increasing. Or you might have seen a diagram like this. Essentially it's the same whether it's a straight line or a curved line. Important is specificity increases over time. But now the question is, how long is that time? I outlined this in a previous lecture when we looked at the cyclization and periodization, how long training phases can last, should last, based on the residual effects, the ceiling effects and the initial effects. We also looked at the long-term athlete development and the model that me and my colleague Terry Peters developed, where obviously far to the right at the professional level, the specificity will be much higher than far to the left at the junior level. But we didn't talk about what is specificity actually in the first place, because very often people think specificity is what looks very specific. One of the best explanations I have found is from Verkhoshansky called Dynamic Correspondence. And he came up with 5 factors, 5 considerations for what could be specific. The amplitude and direction of movement, the accentuated region of force development, the dynamics of effort, the rate and time of force production, and the regimen of muscular work. Some people have expanded on that and then also looked at energy system development. But anyway, I've written an article about that, what is sport-specific training, and there's also a video out there where I look at sports specificity. So what did we learn in this lecture of increasing specificity? We looked at the basic premise of that principle, we looked at the biological basis of that principle, and then the practical application, how that principle can either be applied within a mesocycle or macrocycle, or also in the lifespan of an athlete. I see you in the next one, the principle of interdependency. If you've missed the previous one on individuality, you can also find it here. And don't forget to subscribe.